Okay, this is my Aboriginal Soundscape sample that I've put together for you quite quickly, so I hope you will put a bit more time and effort into it than I have. And it's based on the Dreamtime story called Google Gaga the Kookaburra, and it's a story about how there are animals who are fighting on the plain, an emu and a brolga, and they're arguing and fighting, and one of them throws an egg up into the sky. The egg splits and bursts into flames, and it becomes the sun. And so they decide eventually that they quite like this sun in the sky, and they decide also, or the people in general, the creatures all decide that they would like to announce the arrival of the sun each morning. So they actually ask Google Gaga the Kookaburra to laugh his loudest to awaken people in the mornings. So that was a really quick summary of the story. So what I have done to represent this story is, I'll quickly show you, I have some kookaburra sound here right at the end, which is obviously the kookaburra heralding the morning. What I've got here is a rocket launch sound that I found online and a fireworks sound that I found online, and they represent the sun being, the egg being thrown up into the sky and the sun up in the sky. I have used a djembe sound throughout to be the rhythmic ostinato, and I have used for descending melodies here, which I'll show you in a moment. I've used a MIDI sound that descends, and I've overlapped it so it's meant to sound a little bit like the brolga and the emu arguing and fighting out on the plain. And because they are out on the plain, I decided to use the sound of wind, which I found that wind sound online as well. With the wind sound, I decided it didn't sound enough like a drone. It was a little bit too much of a sound effect and didn't have enough depth to the sound. So I added just a single note of a bassoon sound so that I could support the sound of the drone. So now I have not used any recorded sounds just because I was trying to do this in a bit of a hurry, but I have used a combination of loops, sound effects that I found online, to MIDI sounds, and I've also used automation, and I have trimmed things, and I'll talk you through that now. So if I start with my drone, this drone here, as I said, is a sound effect that I found online. It was quite a long loop that I trimmed quite short so that I just found the part of it that I liked, and I trimmed it and I looped it, but I also dropped it in pitch. I'm going to quickly show you how to do that. If you right click on a track, you get all of these things here that happen. But if you also double click on a track, it brings up this editing part down here. So what I did was this thing here called pitch shift, where I actually made the pitch -12. So I made it a deeper sound than what it originally was. The other thing I have done with my drone here is, if I show you the automation, I have adjusted the volume of my drone, and I have also used panning with my drone to make it sound like the wind is moving around rather than just being static. With the instrument drone that's a bassoon, I simply went into the instruments and found a deep sounding instrument that I liked, and I just dragged one single note, quite low pitch, all the way along. Again, I have used volume, so I've made it come up and come down, so it's fading in and fading out. I have also, I think I've used panning. No, I haven't used panning in that one. So that's my drone. Then with my rhythmic ostinato, I found in the loops a solid djembe sound, and I just trimmed it a little bit to the part that I liked, and I've looped it all the way through. I wanted it to be there the whole time, but I didn't want it to be too dominating. So in terms of the volume, you can see that I have it fairly loud at the beginning, but then I bring it right down when the effect of the sun being thrown into the sky, the egg and the sun happens. I've brought it right out of the way there, and I fade it out again at the end. And I've also done some panning with that, so it sounds like it's moving around. I liked the idea of it moving around on a plane. Then if we have a look at my descending melodies, I quite simply just used a MIDI sound descending from a high note to a low note. If I click on it, we can have a look and see what that looks like. Just moving steps down. And I chose the sound of a blown bottle because I wanted it to sound a little bit ethereal or sort of a little bit vague and not too sort of electronic necessarily. So the other thing I have done with these is that I've actually used effects. So if you have a look in here, this is where I've used some distortion and some delay and some filter echo. And I did change these so that they were up quite high. So I've turned the distortion up high. I've turned the delay up quite high. The same with the echo. And the reason why I have used those things is so that it all kind of sounds a little bit blurry. I wanted it to be all a little bit vague. Now, in there in terms of automation, I haven't really done anything with volume. I've just left it at 1 volume, and I haven't done anything with panning. I could have used automation on all of these, but I didn't really want to. Now, when it comes to the sound effect of the kookaburra, I found this sound online. It was a very, very long one. I trimmed it short and I just put it at the end. I did use volume automation so that it started quite loud and then faded out with everything else at the end. And I didn't use any panning with that one. And finally, the last couple of sounds I've got here is the sound of the rocket launch. Now, these two sounds I also found online. The rocket launch was much longer than that. I just trimmed it so I found the part that I liked. And you'll see that what I've done with the rocket launch is I've got the volume quite loud because it needs to be a loud sound. That's the egg being thrown into the sky. And the fireworks, sorry, you can hear that in the background. The fireworks, I've also started that quite loud, but then I've faded it out so that it sounds like it really cracks off and then it gets out of the way so the kookaburra sound can come through. And with the automation, I used volume, but I didn't use any panning for those either. So in essence, what I've got here is essentially the story, roughly the story. Here's the arguing here. Here's the egg being thrown into the sky. Here's the sun being formed. And then finally, here's the kookaburra that's laughing at the end to herald the beginning of the day. You can see that the texture is quite thin. It's not very busy. There's not a lot happening all at the same time. You can see I've included the descending melodies here. We've got a rhythmic ostinato the whole way through. We've got a drone the whole way through. And remembering that none of my sounds are traditional Aboriginal instruments or singing, but they represent, the whole thing represents the general structure of Aboriginal music. So that's kind of in essence the way that you would put together a soundscape. And of course, you'll have your own